Welcome to Longevity Industries' presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast. I'm your host, Dean Phillips. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Precision Metal Forming Association and the PMA's Educational Foundation, for helping us with this show. I have with me today, I have Matt McLelland from Covenant Transportation, where he is the Innovation Strategist. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on, Dean.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule here at this time when we're recording this. It's getting close to Thanksgiving, so we've all got things to do. Probably make sure that we don't distract our family members from doing what they need to do at Thanksgiving.
A much-needed break. We're really looking forward to it.
There you go. I like that. So right off the bat, what is your key takeaway for 5 years from now as the destiny of manufacturing, and as it relates to Matt? Matt is involved in transportation, both on the side of providing the services of moving products from point A to point B, but also the other associated services that come with that, logistics, etc. So what is your big takeaway from 5 years from now?
Wow, Dean, I wish I had more. I wish we had more than 20 minutes to spend together answering that question. I've got all kinds of thoughts on that. So just as a little bit of context, we're a publicly traded trucking company. We've got 4,000 assets running back and forth across the country, 8,000 trailers, and so you hit the nail right on the head. That's the business that we're in. In terms of 5 years from now, we're there is a lot that has gone on in trucking in the last several years, and most of it, Dean, has been a lot of high tech. We have a lot of startups out of Silicon Valley that have discovered the inefficiencies in the transportation world. And so one of the things that I think I'm going to see more in the next 5 years is the use of artificial intelligence to connect shippers and carriers together in a more automated way, so that shippers that need our services can know what truck is closest to them, with a driver that needs to be ending his shift close to wherever it is that he lives, where he is in his hours of service, the type of truck, all of that traditionally right now that takes place with a phone call and a lot of looking at spreadsheets and systems and things. All of that's going to be automated through the use of artificial intelligence. And already I'm starting to see some startups that are addressing that.
Wow.
And I think another area that we're also going to see a lot of really interesting progress is in the area of autonomy. Now, autonomous trucking and autonomous vehicles for consumers, that is a long conversation. We could almost dedicate like an 8-part series on that. But as it relates to fleets, Dean, safety is where we are right now. We want to provide our drivers with as many tools on the truck to keep them and the driving public as safe as possible. And right now, autonomous, and we just released our first level 2 automated truck onto the road a couple of weeks ago, it's not about driving itself. It's not about a driver taking his hands off the wheels. It's about providing safety tools and resources to do everything from automatic braking, automatic lane keep, a lot of things that you see on your traditional cars today. But we're over the next 5 years, which is to answer your question, we're going to see that level of autonomy continue to get stronger.
Great. And when you talk about different levels of autonomy, can you explain a little bit further on what that means?
Sure. So in autonomy, you have what's called level 0 through 5. And just to give a little bit of context, we're at, as a society right now, we're around level 2. Level 2 is what comes in. If you go out and you bought a brand new Subaru today, it comes with every Subaru comes with what's called the eyesight functionality. That is adaptive cruise control, so the car speeds up and slows down based on the car that's in front of it. It has lane keep, where it'll sort of keep the car from drifting outside of its lane. It has other types of safety features as it relates to automatic brake assist. So it'll step on the brake by itself if it detects a hard incident that takes place right in front of you. So that's level 2. Level 3 takes that up another level, introduces some more automation into it. A lot of companies, there's actually not a whole lot of difference between level 2 and 3. Really where things start to come into play is level 4. That's where the truck is driving itself. An operator must be in the vehicle at all times to be able to take over at any time. And the truck is basically making decisions on its own about what to do, including changing lanes and moving through traffic. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but for the sake of conversation, that's pretty much the delineation with level 4. Level 5, which is sort of what people think of when they hear the word autonomous, Dean, is nobody in the truck, nobody in the car. It's the vehicle is driving itself from point A to point B without any input from a human being. And I personally don't see that becoming a reality in trucking for many years to come, probably decades to come. And of course, that's a very debatable topic. When you get professionals that kind of track this technology all the time, there is the technology itself and the limit and the progress that's made through that to make it available and working and functional. But there's the bigger piece of it, which is the regulatory piece. And I know in your industry, you probably run into this all the time. There's a lot of things that technology can do. It's just that the laws haven't caught up with it quite yet.
Right. And you hit the nail on the head that regulation has to be up to speed on all of these aspects. And how do we control that throughout, whether it's in manufacturing or in vehicles? How do we address all of a sudden, okay, now we've got a bunch of vehicles on the road that drive themselves. How do we address that? And who's responsible for it? Is it the car company? Is it the person who's being driven in that vehicle? Or in the case of this, the load that you're hauling? There's all kinds of things about that, because at the end of the day, safety is an issue, but so is litigation.
Oh yeah. I mean, what's crazy, Dean, is that you could have, already there's a lot of things that technology does a better job of than humans do. And even in the current form of autonomous driving that we have in vehicles like Teslas, a lot of that, sometimes the car's making better decisions, but the minute that technology causes an accident versus a human causes an accident, you could have an Uber, some of these Uber taxis that they've kind of been testing. It can hit somebody and all of a sudden it's front page news everywhere, and liability and lawyers are going nuts. But then you have a human that hits somebody and that doesn't even make the news. Right. And it's still a terrible situation caused by different people. But the technology, I feel like, is being held to a higher standard. And to some extent, it probably should be initially. But I think in the not too distant future, Dean, we're going to have tech making better decisions, everything from driving cars to picking better stocks. And already my Spotify account picks better music taste than I do on my own. But, listeners are like, hey, that's a great song. I never would have found that on my own. I'm really glad I pay for this service every month.
There you go. Yeah, that's right.
That's a great, so.
And I think it's interesting you mentioned about like picking stocks and things like that. You see AI filling in a lot of areas. There is in manufacturing a company that does what they monitor systems, and they don't need to know anything about the system. They don't need to know what it is or any details about it, but it tracks information. And then it says, okay, here's the outcome where it was bad or where it was good. And then it learns from that and says, okay, then this was a factor in that. And it picks things that are important or made a difference in those decisions. And then from that, it goes, like, let's say in stocks, it may say, well, last year was a harsh winter. Therefore, don't invest in orange juice, or at least it advises you of some of this data because the goal is, I'm sure for everybody, is to make it less human involvement and more, you want the decision to be made instead of on the basis of how you feel about something, and make it more about data.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when you look at automation, and there's another division of our company that does warehousing, and as from the world that you're in every day, that, automation is a big topic. And initially people think it's about replacing humans. It's about, replacing humans that, get sick or don't pass drug tests or don't show up for work or have a high turnover rate. And that's part of it, right? But it's really bigger than that. It's the AI and the automation, these are all things that are about replacing very repetitive and oftentimes very menial tasks that your listening population here would probably not want to do themselves, and freeing those people up to do things that are more complex and more interesting and more stimulating and probably higher paying jobs. And so, it's about, and we've seen this throughout history, right? There's been, automation, Eli Whitney in the cotton gin, all of a sudden he makes a device that, all of a sudden eliminates the need for people to separate cotton seeds from cotton, and we see that throughout manufacturing history. Henry Ford and the assembly line, devices and innovations, which is the world that I live in every day, that makes work easier, that makes work more interesting, that frees people up to do more interesting and more complicated and hopefully better paying tasks.
Absolutely. And I think despite the fact that people would have you believe that, oh, well, we're just trying to get rid of people with machines, it is not that way. We just can't find people. That is one of the biggest things. And I'm sure it's difficult because I've heard nothing but the difficulties of transportation to find drivers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will be honest with you. There is a part of automation for us that is about driver turnover. We have driver turnover in our industry is very high. Warehousing is also very high. We're right around 48%. I think in warehousing it's close to 32%. There is a component of automation that's about, predictable, reliable work, right? But that's just a very small piece of it, right? So, some of the things so automation and autonomous driving is something that is not immediately in our future with trucking, but it is something that I'm keeping my eye on. It's something that every one of our customers ask about. Dean, I'll go to the Consumer Electronics Show every year as part of my job, which maybe we'll get to talk about here in just a couple of minutes. I have an interesting role in our company as the innovation guy. And I'll look at the latest and greatest in everything from autonomous driving, both for consumers and for trucks. And, Consumer Electronics Show is not really meant for a trade association, like manufacturing or for trucking, but there are tons of things that if, in fact, anybody listening out there in your role, if you can sort of figure out a way to let your boss go to the Consumer Electronics Show, there's a huge personal fun component to it. There are always going to be things that you will find that you'll be able to take back to your job, insights into the future that are going to be coming in the manufacturing space, and in our case, the trucking space.
Absolutely. I agree with that 110% because I see it I didn't go to the Consumer Electronics Show, but I often see the highlights and things like that. And I can tell you that how people interact with equipment is changing dramatically. And it doesn't matter whether that's in the manufacturing field or if it's in the consumer electronics. How we interact is so different today, and it will be so different tomorrow that people don't even realize how quick things are changing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example, and this dovetails directly into some of the manufacturing. I've only listened to a handful of your podcasts over the last couple of months since you and I first met. I love listening to podcasts, and by the way, thanks for having me on, because I did one of these a few weeks ago and had a lot of fun with it. But, when you look at 3D printing and the role that that's going to play in mass production of either finished goods or subassemblies or parts, that go into other parts. I have to look at that, as a trucking company, as 3D printing as a disruptive technology potentially could change, the way we carry goods, because instead of them being manufactured in Vietnam and put on a boat to Long Beach, and they get to Long Beach in a car in a container, and then they get put on one of our trucks or on rail. and then driven across the country ultimately to where it's going to be incorporated into a product through the manufacturing process. What if all of a sudden you could just start manufacturing those parts on site as needed in a timely manner whenever you wanted to do, and you cut out that whole section of the supply chain? I mean, that's exciting stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's exciting and scary at the same time. For us, it's like, well, that's a big piece of revenue that would go away, but something tells me that we're always going to have stuff to carry regardless of what 3D printing does.
Well, I'm sure that everybody who is involved in it wondered, as far as like packaging, for example, how far packaging has changed. You look at years ago, how much damage there was when you shipped, let's say, televisions from coast to coast. Now you have less size in the packaging, and you have less damaged goods.
Yep.
So how much better we have gotten in how we package items and how we sort them and track them. The number of lost packages has gone down dramatically from where we used to be. What are some
especially if you're using Covenant Transportation, we don't damage or we don't damage or lose anything. Yeah, we have perfect on time.
That's what you want, right? Let me put it this way. That's what people expect today. Yep. It just is. We have such a high level of expectation out of everything, whether it's our vehicles, our home electronics, you name it. People have a high level of expectation and a very low tolerance for failure rates.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll give you a good example, and this is something that's really kind of hot on my radar right now, is one of the big buzzwords right now with our customer base is visibility. Where's my stuff? Where's my stuff? When's it going to get here? Because in the transportation business, it's not so much that you're carrying an entire load of goods from point A to point B. Is you've got to schedule the delivery of those things. You can't just show up and say, hey, Mr. Guardcheck, I'm here with my load. Tell me where to go. Like, no, you've got a 20-minute window that you've got to show up in. And if you go outside that window, then you may have to sit outside the gate or go drive around the block or go to a truck stop or something until you're ready to go. And so the timing and the logistics of knowing where trucks are is a big deal. And so we have different IoT sensors on the truck. We have different IoT sensors on the trailer, but being able to provide customers a link that they can click on and see their truck visually on a map, see where it is, when it's expected to arrive based on all the telematics that's coming from the truck and where that driver is in his ELD cycle, because they can only drive for a certain amount of time every day. This type of visibility for the customer, to your point, Dean, is exactly what customers expect. And if we can't provide that to them, they're going to go with a carrier that will. And it sounds really easy to provide that. It's really much more difficult. And it's one of the things that all carriers sort of struggle with. And there's a lot of different players right now in the tech arena. There's a company called 4Kites and Project 44 and J.B. Hunt has a tool that they've developed that allows you to have real-time visibility into where your product is while it's being shipped.
Tell me a little bit about, on the handling side and the warehouse side, what more that entails for how you handle and transport.
So, as a carrier, once we arrive at a warehouse, it then sort of becomes ownership of the customer. So, it's their warehouse or it's a 3PL's warehouse. And, as soon as our driver, backs up to the door and opens it up, the liability is kind of on them. And I've got insight into, how that works because in my previous job, I worked for a 3PL and they managed over 30 million square feet of warehouse space across the country. And there was, all kinds of changes that were constantly happening, innovations in forklifts and the way they handled goods. You brought up a great point earlier about packaging. There's lots of packaging changes that we saw that protected goods better during transit, not just mostly at the pallet level. There are there's better training. There's a lot of damage that's caused by, drivers bumping into things and knocking things over and putting things in the wrong bin that, often cause damage to products. But, there's training, there's been, again, packaging changes and innovations. It's funny how you go to a big show. Have you been to ProMat or Modex in your time?
I've been to ProMat before.
Yeah, ProMat and Modex, they're kind of alternate years. Amazing the kind of stuff that you see when you go to a show like that. Just innovations and changes that will just blow you away. I had no idea that existed. I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know there was a Sealed Air had a new product that allowed you to, drop something from 10 feet, not do any damage. So that's another thing. ProMat and Modex are like CES for the manufacturing industry. I always have a lot of fun going to that. I go to that about every other year.
Yeah, and it's funny because when we look at manufacturing, we see manufacturing usually in just our blocked off field of vision. So we think of manufacturing as building a car, building a washing machine, building a cooktop. But there are people that build boxes. There are companies that build materials that actually house the parts. So whether it's palleting, whether it's all of those things are all a different level of manufacturing, whether you're building the item or you're building the item that the item goes in, or you're building the item that it sits on.
I'll give you a great example. Here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I'm headquartered, Dean, there's a company called Southern Champion Tray. They make paper boxes, mostly for the food industry, but for all kinds of different industries. And the president of the company is a friend of mine. We get together for lunch about once a week or once a month because our offices are not too close to each other. So we meet at Whole Foods and he shows up. He's got this box with him. And he tosses this box on the table and says, "Tell me what you think this is." He says, "We just created this. It's a brand new thing. What do you think?" And I looked at it, and it had this tab on it that was kind of interesting. I said, "Well, this tab is kind of weird." And he says, "Well, open it up. Pretend your lunch is in there right now." And I opened it up, and the way it opened up, it tore in a way that, there was no way to fix it. And I said, "Well, this doesn't work very well because this tore when I open it. How am I supposed to use it again?" He's like, That's the idea. He says, that's the idea. He says, we are entering an economy where Uber Eats and all these different people that live in these big cities that, can't walk out of their, New York City condos to go be bothered with going to buy food. They have to have it delivered to them. Tampering of food is a huge thing. You get on the phone, you call a number, some strange person brings food that you're going to eat to your door. How do you know it hasn't been tampered with? He says, this innovation, this box that we've come up with, as far as we can tell, is the first one that exists on the market. And what was interesting about that is you look at innovation, and the definition of innovation is that, compare that to disruption, was a great idea. It was a simple idea. It was a great idea. And this guy makes these boxes, and he, I think, is probably going to get the intellectual property on it so that, they'll be able to maybe have the exclusive right to make that. So there's so much going on. It's just mind-blowing. It's almost more than I can keep on up with. It's a good thing I'm just limited to transportation, because I think I'd go nuts if I had to stay on top of everything that was going on in manufacturing and supply chain and trucking and transportation.
Yeah, it's. I'll tell you, from a technology standpoint, this is a great time to be involved with manufacturing, because there's so many new things coming out, and I kind of geek out on it because it is amazing. I'm always kind of like programs like How It's Made and things like that, as I think a lot of people do. And it's like, wow, somebody came up with that idea. And it just like you talk about that packaging that has to be torn. They did that with pills years ago. With everything had a tamper-proof top that had to be installed on it, and once you tore it, that was it. You tore it, and they knew that it had been tampered with. Or if it was already tampered with and you open it, you knew not to take it and to return it.
Yeah, and some of these ideas, like you look at autonomous driving, and you compare that to the box that gets torn for tamper-proof food, and you think, well, that's kind of boring. That's boring. But hey, you know what? that's huge, believe it or not. I mean, it may not be the most exciting thing. Innovation doesn't have to be the, blockchain or RFID or driverless trucks or hydrogen powered, vehicles. Innovation can be something as simple as the box top. I know this is a podcast, and it's, I actually do a lot of public speaking, and I'm on stage and I have PowerPoints and things and pictures that I use as I'm sort of making points. But I show this picture of a fast food restaurant sometimes, and I'll ask the audience, it's like, who can find the most innovative thing in this picture? And very rarely do anybody ever get this, but I'll give them like 10 seconds to look at it, and I'll say, it's the Coke machine that has been moved from behind the counter to the other side of the counter. The lore and the story behind that is a Burger King general manager had a really small area behind the counter. Everybody kept turning around to get drinks, and they were stepping on top of each other. And then one day on a weekend, he just said, I'm moving that thing to the other side of the counter. And he and his brother-in-law, who was a carpenter, they moved it over there without permission of Burger King corporate. And they then, customers could then make their own drinks. We did three things. First, it gave the customer something to do while they waited on their food, and they got exactly what they wanted. So if you had a kid that liked to mix up the Diet Coke and the Coke, you could do that if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. It reduced congestion behind the counter, and it saved on labor cost.
Yes.
That was a small idea, a tiny innovation that yielded huge results for the company. And actually, that guy won some kind of award, as I understand it. And now most fast food companies do that. So that was a small innovation. I mean, it could be anything in a manufacturing process, but a small change that yielded huge results. And I think sometimes, and I think your listeners probably know a lot about this, you think you have to spend a lot of money making innovative changes in your company, but it really doesn't have to be that way. It could be as simple as moving the Coke machine.
Yeah. Something that's simple and functional has a place. I don't care how technical something has to be. If it's simplistic and it's impactful, it's something that's important. And you see that happen all around. You mentioned about the Coke machine. It took away the labor of every time somebody coming up for a refill and asking for it or not getting what they wanted, and how much time that takes. Now they they do it, just sort of like self-checkout lines too. Okay.
Yep. Another great example. And you know where the best ideas come from, Dean? The lowest, I don't want to sound classist, but the forklift drivers, the box packers, the guys on the assembly line. Those are the people that sit there and have the most insight into small changes that you can make, because that's just what they do every day. They don't have anything else to think about, which is why we try to engage our drivers, the people that are most connected to the truck. Like, what would you like to see different about the layout of the dash? Or, a lot of that we actually ask them a lot of comfort questions so that we can play a role with our with Freightliner as the way we redesign the cab, because a lot of our drivers live in the back of the cab, because it's sleeper trucks. But your drivers, your forklift drivers, your order pickers, these are the people that have tremendous insight into making innovative changes to your process. And so I would just advise anybody listening that, don't overlook these people that have incredibly valuable information.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. In manufacturing, operators can be some of the most informative people when you ask them a question about a process or how they're doing something, how to make it better, because they're dealing with it on a daily basis, not somebody who's sitting up in an office and says, well, I know how we do this. Okay. Can you walk me through the processes? Can you tell me every single step that happens out there? That guy can.
Yep. Yep, absolutely.
Because he lives it every day. He knows exactly how he does something. He can even probably show you the arm movements that it goes in, and he can tell you the ergonomic challenges that are found within processes.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll give you one more example. I know I could talk forever. We're probably running out of time, Dean, but there was in our shop a few weeks ago, because at our headquarters, which is also one of our big truck terminals, and that's where we do maintenance on the trucks. It could be anything from changing the headlight to rebuilding an engine. So I go back there to meet one of our mechanics longer story, he follows me on Instagram, and he had said, "Hey, I work in the shop. You should come out here and visit me sometime. You're the innovation guy." So I go out there and I visit him a couple weeks ago, and he's working on this major engine rebuild. I'm looking at this giant Class 8 truck, right? And this guy, Kevin, is just arms deep inside this thing. And I looked at it, and first thing I said was, "Do you do this all by yourself, or could two people do it? Like, would it be better?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, it'd be easier if two people did it, but there's a reason why we don't do that." And I'm like, "Well, what is that?" And he says, "Well, the billing system that we log our time in is not sophisticated enough to handle two different technicians." And I said, "Wait a minute. You could be 20% more efficient, 30% more efficient if two people were working on this." He's like, "Oh, yeah, but the billing system won't let us do it, so we just have to do it like this." So here was a guy that gave me some instant, like, does anybody know that? He's like, "Man, it's just the way we've always done it." And so it sounds like I'm about to cry, but I'm just kind of about to crack up because I'm just remembering how silly it was to me. I'm like, here's the mechanic that could probably make a tremendous improvement by making the suggestion to the right person. And of course, in this scenario, that was me, about a deficiency that they saw in the way that they had always done things. And so I went and I talked to the IT department, like, "Why is it like this?" And I went and I talked to the maintenance supervisor. I'm like, "Really? Is this the way it's supposed to work?" And I think we're in the early stages of completely redesigning a process so that we can actually have two people bill time to the same job and hopefully be able to get it done quicker, more efficiently, less expensive, get that vehicle back on the road and earning money for us as a company.
Yeah. There's no question. That's what it's all about, is finding solutions, and they can be very simple utility type solutions, or they can be sophisticated. But most of them, I think, come from a very simplistic way. The simpler, the better. It's easier for people to understand, and it's easier to see the quick result from it too.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, sir, I appreciate you taking time with me today. It's been my pleasure to have you on here. I really do appreciate you. We've had Matt McLelland on from Covenant Transportation. I want to thank Longevity Industries for helping putting this show together, as well as the Precision Metal Forming Association and the PMA's Educational Foundation. Thanks, everybody. Make it a great day.